And your opinion is fine, the service is bad, I didn't like the food, okay, that's fair. If you claim they served you rat meat,
Yeah.
that's not protected by the First Amendment.
And so there's consequences for it.
You bet.
Yeah.
And
I bet
there are
I know
different
what he's
types of
ranting
speech,
about.
like commercial speech.
We're talking about free speech.
Yeah, you can't cry fire in it.
Yeah, but what Philip's saying is actually it's more serious than that, because it isn't a right to say anything you want. That's
No, you don't.
And it's not just because there's someone who can be hurt by it, but because there actually are consequences. And his point is essentially that the government can't interfere with that right, but that's different from allowing somebody to have to say anything they want.
If you go out to Central Park in Santa Clarita, stand in the middle of the park and say whatever you want about President Biden, and nothing can happen to you.
Right.
Except unless you threaten him. But aside from that, you can call him a communist, you can
Right.
call him a socialist, you can do whatever you want to say, that he takes bribes without any repercussion. Okay, that's political speech. But does that mean the business you work for, if they found out about that or you saw a recording of that, does that mean they couldn't say, well, you know what? We don't want you working here. No, they can terminate you.
Good.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's just the government can't imprison you.
Right.
Okay, they can't execute you, imprison you, take away your property, fine you, whatever. And people don't understand that. So when these Harvard students, when you're talking about free speech, yes, they have the right to say it. And then if there are consequences, the First Amendment doesn't protect them.
So I hope everyone heard what Philip said. He's going to write that out for you one day, though. So he'll write it down.
Read
Guess where Tracy is right now.
I don't find that. Okay, Mike just said with her boyfriend, which I just want to. I'll repeat it in case you didn't hear it online. Just to be clear, that's free speech, isn't it?
By the way, and John
True.
Stillman will know this quite well. Why?
So you let Joanne finish. Where is Tracy?
She's in Bloomfield, Michigan.
So that I mean Joyce isn't on right now, but Joyce is, but the Schulmans will appreciate. Yes, Tracy's in Bloomfield Hills right now in Michigan for work, not for fun, and not with her boyfriend. If she has a boyfriend in Bloomfield Hills, then more power to her. Yeah, like what John just said. Yes, he'd probably be Muslim too. Yeah, but that's not Bloomfield Hills is still, she's gonna get mad because that's still Jewish. It's not Dearborn. It's still
And by the way, as John will know, good luck. What happens to you if you publish or disseminate truth movements during time of war? You don't get the First Amendment.
okay. Yes, that's so. Phil, I know Philip's point is yes. We're back to the First Amendment issue, which is no, it's fine. It's fine. If Philip's finishing up the idea, he's going to write it up. He's going to write it up for you. He's going to write it up for you so that you can know what the First Amendment. But the First Amendment is not a freedom.
Disgusting as the protest was today in the rotunda, right? Nobody probably even watched that because
No,
disgusting as it was to be today, they had the right to do it. They didn't have the right to hit the police. They didn't have the right to incite stuff, and that's why they got arrested.
No, they didn't. You can't
Yeah, they got
protest
arrested.
and defend it.
Yes, you can. Absolutely, you can. It's what they said and how they did it.
You're not allowed to.
No,
Yes, of course you
you're
can.
not allowed to.
No, you absolutely can.
Let's fight about it.
So wait a second.
It's what they said and how they did it.
So if when we, look, I happen to agree, there's consequences for it, but you can't stop people from saying or doing dumb things, but
Well,
all the time.
Anyway, so yeah, I was, you guys came in late. For those who came in late, for those who joined late, but part of this came from my desire right now to check in with our college students and see what's going on with them, which is troubling in a whole nother way, which, again, it's not what's going on in Israel, it's what's going on in our own country. So I had some of our students from UCLA texting me pictures of what was going on. Obviously our students that are back east, we have, I was talking to a parent today of a student in Michigan, University of Michigan, a Wolverine, who is dealing with, look, I'm going to tell you something. As of today, at least, most of the college kids on campuses right now are only concerned about one thing: what party they're going to tomorrow night. Okay, so I will tell you that hasn't changed a whole lot, but in a serious way, there are obviously situations where Jewish students are feeling threatened on their campuses because all they know is, look, I saw Jewish people getting murdered last week, and you're this week telling me that you're advocating for that. And again, they're feeling threatened, and I believe, I don't believe that they're going to be hurt, but we don't want to take that risk. And why are Jewish students the only students that can be marginalized and again, basically have they're not protected. So, you can't look at someone funny, if they're another race at college, but, the Jewish students have no way of doing this. So, look, some people are saying, well, we're sinking to their level, whatever. I didn't make the rules, folks. I didn't make the rules. And I don't think at this point we can do much other than make sure that the same rules that apply to all the other ethnic students apply to our kids too. So as of right now, that's what I care about. And again, I'd care about any kid that feels threatened at a college campus. But yeah, as of today, that's where we're at. So we're going to be monitoring it. We're trying to come up with a response where we'll actually broadcast it and put it out on JLTV, and we'll actually show people what's happening. And look, the point is not to rile people up. Everyone who's riled up is already riled up, but it's actually to hold these schools accountable and to make sure people know about it. Look, I had a discussion, just so you know, this was not this year, this was 2 or 3 years ago. I had not an argument. It wasn't, we didn't mutually agree on this, but I had a discussion with our network was the first home, the first office of Stand With Us was my dad gave office space to Stand With Us so he could get off the ground. So that was 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And so we have a very good relationship with them, and they're leaders, obviously, in this, especially on college campuses. They have a whole division that they've funded, which does nothing but work on college campuses on Israel advocacy. I suggested to Stand With Us that there should be a ranking, just like there's a ranking for U.S. News and World Report, just like there's, for colleges, just like there's a ranking for parties on college campuses. There should be a ranking of which schools are the most hostile to Jews and to Israel. I think that should be ranked. There should be evaluation. There should be a scorecard on it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do it. They were afraid to do it. Pretty clearly, they didn't want to deal with it. They don't want to have, but I think they were worried that they would get sued or there'd be repercussions for doing it. If I had the funds and if I had the wherewithal to do it, JLTV would do it. We would do a yearly ranking, and then we would publish it. We would put it out, we would put it out on the media, and we would run it, we would run a ranking and a report on it. So that's what I'd like to do, because again, free speech, but also consequences. So that to me is something that we should be doing. Somebody should be doing it. And since no one else seems to want to do it, and I'm saying if Stand With Us doesn't want to do it, I don't know who wants to do it. I don't know if the ADL wants to do it. I don't think anybody is wanting to do it, probably because they're all scared. I'm not scared. Literally, what they can't do anything to me. But the colleges that are doing this, look, they already know. You saw Harvard lost a couple board members over this. Donors need to know if their college is an egregious That's all I'm going to say is people, when they make their donations, need to know if the college that they are supporting is responding to this or not, whether they're keeping Jewish students. Yeah, and whether Jewish students are safe on their campuses. I have to say that. I mean, they owe that to our community, which has supported every college, university across the country, including Notre Dame and Loyola and Pepperdine and every other school you can find some Jewish donor that paid for a library. So again, it's got to stop. And this is the end for me. There is no argument now at this point. So there's nothing more, and there's no more there. We can't be victimized any more than we were. So that's it. Done. There is, and it's going out tonight. Thank you again for. Now I will tell you, we've been sending out a lot of emails, and I did not want the email today about the travel thing to go out today. It was scheduled for last week. I called her up and said, don't send it out this week. What I should have said, don't send it out until I tell you to send it out. And so I think she heard that I said, I might have said, wait a week or two. And I didn't say, I know, I didn't want it to go out today. I found it to be a little tone deaf. Where's Israel? Where you want to go to Israel this week? So I said, gosh, I was like, I saw it go out. I'm like, you don't know. I set that out. I put that out a month ago.
Get a lot of reply.
Yeah. Well, it's fine. I mean, you guys replied. A lot of people replied. We had a lot of replies, but I did not want it to go out now. I did not. It's his private business. So you can talk to him offline. Yeah. So the email, just folks, in case you didn't see it, Harvey, you got it, didn't you? You got the e-blast, right, Harvey? Harvey?
Yeah, we got it today. Sharon's looking at it right now.
Yeah. So people got it. The whole thing was a survey, and the idea was to do it like at the high holidays. I talked about the fact we were going to go on some trips, and I said, we're going to do a survey, and it was time to go out, and that's when it went out. So it was actually, anyways, that's not good timing. But that being said, she asked me whether I wanted to take out the birthright stuff, and I said, no, let it run. Let the birthright sign up, stay up there, because until I hear differently, there'll be a birthright trip in the summer. So unfortunately.
What are you going to be? You're going November 10th?
Yeah, by myself, maybe with my brother, but that's it. I'm not taking anybody else. It is not a trip that I would take other people for. So anyways, but again, the purpose for that is to deliver the funds directly into the hands of the people there, so that it does not pass through 2 or 3 layers of stuff. It's gone. This is how much collected. This is how much is given. And that's it. So that was the purpose of it. So send it around to people if they're concerned about it. I was concerned about it. People have asked me how much money of your donation is going to the Friends of IDF or ARMD. And I'm like, I honestly don't know. I have somebody said, I looked up Charity Navigator, it says 82%. I'm like, listen, I don't know. I can't even I have no way of knowing. I will know. And I won't give money to people if I don't know that answer. And it's fair. It's a fair question. People want to make sure that the people on the other end are getting their funds. I can tell you one thing, everybody said the same thing. They do not want stuff. So the problem is you cannot send stuff. And I'm still getting people saying, I want to send something to Israel. I said, you can't. First of all, they would be inundated with stuff, and that's not what they need right now. So, and the people of Be'eri, you saw the pictures, they need to rebuild their village. Their kibbutz needs to be rebuilt. It's gone. So anyways, yeah. And I didn't post any pictures of what really happened there. I put every picture I put up did not have bodies in it, just so you know. So, all right. On to where we left off, actually, which was, believe it or not, last week we were talking about slavery, and that's actually where we finished off. We talked about battle again, about going to war. By the way, I was reading Ecclesiastes again, and normally at a funeral, when I share Ecclesiastes, I take out that part. There's a time to kill and a time to heal, a time of war and a time of peace. I didn't take that part out today when I had a funeral today. I left that part in. So that's part of the Bible. That's why we're reading about, the fact that last week we read that you have to keep a shovel with your stuff so that you can have a hole, you can dig a hole when you're in battle. I mean, that's in the Torah. That's a level of detail that the Torah is telling you about how to protect your environment, how to protect your health, that even in battle, you have to make sure that you're not literally soiling the world. And that's a law in the Bible. The last thing we read, though, was the part about slaves and the fact that if they escape, you can't give them back, which again is another reason why slavery was difficult to maintain in Jewish law. Doesn't mean that Jews didn't have slaves. It just meant it was a little bit more expensive and a little bit tougher to maintain that. So the first line we're going to start today, which grabs everyone's attention. No Israelite woman shall be a prostitute, nor shall any Israelite man be a prostitute. Now you notice there's an asterisk there. Oh, an asterisk. What's the asterisk doing there? There's an asterisk by the word prostitute. What is that? What good information are they going to give us here? First of all, what does the King James say for prostitute? Number 18. Look at Mike. He all of a sudden woke up. What? A whore. Dang, yeah.
My translation of the Tanakh says cult prostitute.
There you go. What do you got, John? Yeah, you got cult prostitute. If I look here at the note, it's going to say Kadesha is uncertain, perhaps a type of female functionary at a religious site, a sacred prostitute. But the notion that ancient Near Eastern religions included prostitution has since been discredited. That's not 100% now true, but as you notice for the male, it says Kadesh, which is the masculine counterpart. Look at the last note. So the question of whether cultic prostitution, it hasn't been discredited. There's a question of whether cultic prostitution had spread from places where they had cultic prostitution, which was further, not necessarily in the Canaanite community, but definitely in Babylonia and Assyria, they had cultic prostitution. And we know other cults had cultic prostitution and interesting approaches to sexuality, like Vestal virgins in Rome and things like that, that ended up finding their way into traditions like having nuns, stuff like that. But brides of Christ, if you will. But understand that whether or not this is a cultic prostitute or not, this is not the normal word for prostitute or whore. The Hebrew word for that, which we've been seeing, I'm not pointing at him, but it's been in all of our Tuesday morning classes too, especially Ezekiel's last couple of weeks, was talking about a zonah, a prostitute or a whore. Because in that chapter that we read, not this Tuesday, but the couple Tuesdays ago, chapter 16 of Ezekiel, went over and over talking about the Israelites being like a whore. And it used the word zonah over and over again. It used the word zonah. Kadesha is a different word. What's interesting, of course, about the word Kadesha, the reason why we think it's a cultic prostitute is what's the root of Kadesha? Kadosh, which means holy. Yeah, that's the word, holy. Like Kaddish, Kiddush, Kaddish, Kiddushin, which is marriage, by the way. Kadesha is a similar word. It has some type of holiness to it, which is why the word is usually translated as cultic prostitute. As it's some type of prostitution that's connected to some religious act. So how do we know that that's different? Look at the next line. You shall not bring the fee of a whore or the pay of a dog into the house of your God Adonai in the fulfillment of any vow, for both are abhorrent to your God Adonai. And here the word is zonah. And the other word there is kelev, which is a dog, right? I.e. a male prostitute. They use the the word for it, which is especially interesting because we just had the pet service. What a perfect line to read. Don't bring the pay of a dog into the house. Doesn't say not bring a dog, by the way. Don't bring the pay of a dog. And by the way, it doesn't say the person can't come in. Don't bring their money in. Yes, John.
2318,
Yes.
in my footnote says prostitution is presupposed and not illegal.
Well, I was going to get there.
Oh, well, so,
Yeah. So make that point.
but it is regulated in such a way that they're temple sanctioned. Oh, that makes sense, right?
Yes.
Do all your business outside, blah, 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 blah. No, my
Yep.
question is, let's fast forward to modern times.
Yes.
If it's not illegal back then,
Yes.
and I'm not an expert,
Yes.
not by any means,
Yes.
just let the world know that.
Yes.
And this is, and I'm not a history buff in regards to prostitution.
Yes.
Really? You're right. But in America.
Yes. It's illegal.
Well, some parts.
Except for Nevada.
Start,
Yeah.
So my question is, if it's, based on the Bible, how did it change? Like at what point?
So Kelly just said part of it is the Judeo-Christian part, which is mainly the Christian part. So Judaism definitely wanted it regulated. So there's a couple questions that we're going to get to, a couple answers. But first, so John's question is, well, how do we get to where it is in America, where it's basically illegal? By the way, the United States is one of the few countries where it is illegal, by the way. The reason, and again, it's not in most of Nevada, with the exception of Clark County and a few other counties, I guess, Washoe County, like the big counties where they're cities. So the point of prostitution being illegal, and as your point was, it wasn't always illegal. And there was a good, every time you see one of those Westerns where they went into the saloon, that was also a bordello, you knew that what you knew that what was happening. I mean, it was happening, right? So America started cracking down on prostitution pretty much in the 20s and 30s when it became pretty much overrun by organized crime. Partly, it was also, I think, a little bit more of the Christian approach to sex, which was a little bit more, I don't want to say puritanical, but it was definitely a little hypocritical too when it came to like what was going to be advocated for and what would be okay. Judaism understands that. So Judaism never prohibited prostitution. When it says no Israelite woman shall be a prostitute, even if we understand that as a prostitute, I'm going to now just tell you like how this has been interpreted through the ages. Number one, it's not. So on one level, maybe it's cultic prostitution. That's forbidden. But if it's not, if it's any type of prostitution, then you're not supposed to encourage your family to become prostitutes. It's not like what you want your daughter to be. However, to another level, it says no Israelite woman will be a prostitute, which kind of implies that if she's not an Israelite, it's okay for her to be a prostitute. So what would that mean? It would mean that amongst the Israelite community, if they visited prostitutes in the biblical period, perhaps they weren't Israelite. They were from other communities. We believe that there were Israelite prostitutes. Why? Because the Bible says there were. The most famous one being the story of Solomon deciding between two women who the baby was. The moms were both prostitutes. The Bible says they were both prostitutes, and it doesn't say they weren't Israelite. Now, technically speaking, if they were going to Solomon, they might not have been Israelite. He's the king of the country. He's the king for everybody. But it doesn't say they're not Israelite. And so we have to kind of assume that. There's also an interesting archaeological discussion on areas that they believe were that were bordellos, essentially, brothels, is that they have found that in areas where there were Philistine brothels, for example, they found the remains of aborted fetuses. In the areas where they didn't have that, where they think there were Israelite prostitutes, they didn't find the aborted fetuses. So they're not 100% sure the place was a bordello, but based on the archaeological architecture, the way they looked at the building, it appeared that it was that type of situation. How do they know? Because they're not really rooms. They're not full rooms. They're not like a house, but they seem to be areas, compartments, or rooms where women would have lived. We don't know for sure, but the Bible story seems to imply that there were prostitutes living together in the same house in the story of Solomon. Yeah.
What is a cult?
So a cult prostitute would have been someone who engaged in prostitution for the sake of a god or gods. So they would have sex, people would watch it, they would pay for it. In some cases, they would have sex with the prostitute as a way of making an offering. It's difficult, by the way, to compete with that kind of religion. I just want to say, if I'm running my temple and their temple has the cult prostitutes, I'm having a hard time selling the religion, by the way. I just want to point out, not necessarily the religion that people are signing up for, which could be one of the reasons why, again, Israelites didn't want that kind of stuff to go on. But listen, we also have to understand they didn't view prostitution highly. That's for sure. So if they couldn't be any kind of prostitute, that's one thing, both men and women, which shows you that men and women were engaged in it. The next line doesn't say, and this, you could say that this actually next line proves that they were Israelite prostitutes. Not that they couldn't be prostitutes. They could be prostitutes in the sense they could be common escorts, not cultic prostitutes, but their funds weren't good enough, or not good, I won't say good enough. They weren't appropriate enough to be brought to the temple as an offering, which would imply that they understood that if a prostitute is taking their wages, even if they're well-intended, that they're not supposed to bring it to God and use that money for an offering. Like they could use other money, but not that money, which is basically saying, look, we know what you're doing, just don't bring that money. I don't know how you decide that money was for that, and this money is the money that I made from selling, pottery on the side, that's my hobby. So this is an issue. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is actually has modern ramifications. This actually means something, because synagogues, especially in Southern California, for years have had the discussion of, do we take money from people who are involved in pornography? Maybe organized crime too, but pornography flat out, because many of the leaders of the porn business in California, including people that I've known over the years, who in some cases have been very successful, very philanthropic, and also very involved in the Jewish community and in the legal community and in the, you can read these stories, they're in the paper, I'm talking about even judges whose families, again, were making money in prostitution for years, and whether or not that money should have been used for campaigns, whether it should have been used for political campaigns, whether it should be used for synagogue donations. And so synagogues usually have had a policy, for the most part, in the Valley over the years, of not asking. We just don't know. Right. And most of the people that are engaged in the business are engaged in other businesses too. If they were publishing pornography, they also published other stuff. They published magazines. They published other non-pornographic magazines. If they were involved in video distribution, they were involved in other video distribution. If they were involved in studio stuff, they were involved in other studio stuff too. They didn't just make porn. So it's very difficult to, again, say, well, we know all of their money came from that, or which money came from that. And so synagogues kind of had this policy of not really asking the question. And I don't know many synagogues that have turned down the money. As a matter of fact, I've never heard of any. There are other questions about, synagogues that took money from Bernie Madoff or took money from Michael Milken. I mean, the Jewish community took money from Michael Milken for years before and after he went to jail. So just so you know, so is half the Jewish community in the Valley. No, but he was involved in funds, but of whose?
And all these wealthy people from everywhere would come, they came, have their family, and, that's when I first heard of Heidi Klum.
Yeah, well, look, we've had, and of course, she was Jewish and is Jewish, still alive. Her father was one of the big campaigners, by the way, against circumcision. He was a major doctor against circumcision. So that's how he made a name for himself. Anyways, so this has been a legitimate question for years. This is not something new. This is something that we've been discussing for a long time. We've had it in our synagogue. I mean, we've had this discussion of funds and people who have been involved in the business for years. And like most synagogues, we haven't turned down the money or drilled into the question of where this, it's not the right term, but whatever, to where this money came from. Yeah.
I think that you end up on the, proverbial slippery slope, because then you say, well, did the synagogue take money from someone who made his or her money in big tobacco or
Yeah.
ExxonMobil? Or, I mean, where does it end?
So the question of what is yes, it is a question of what we're going to, what we're going to allow or where our line will be. But then there's another question of whether those people should have naming rights if they're known. Again, most of the people that were involved in the porn business were not known. And so it was not an issue of saying, by the way, these people made all their money from that. Now, there's also this difference of, again, what does it mean to encourage it? What does it mean to allow your family members to be engaged in it? Interestingly, most of the people who were involved in the adult entertainment business did not encourage their kids to not only not participate in it, but encourage them to kind of to stay away from it. I had a friend who actually was the second generation involved in the business, and things did not work out well for him emotionally or mentally or health wise. But yeah, he's one of the few people I know that was a second generation person in the business. They definitely didn't encourage their family members to be talent on screen, so to speak. So that is an interesting thing to think about. There's also, again, the ramifications not only of like how it plays out in our community. There's also a question of, okay, what about in Israel? Because Israel is the first country in 2,000 years to actually, rather than address this from a Judeo-Christian standpoint, a Jewish standpoint. And again, not necessarily Christian, but Western law also factored into it. So the question of what were the Western norms when it came to pornography, when it came to prostitution. And so Israel came up with a very interesting approach. Tell you kind of in a nutshell what happened. So Israel definitely did not want to encourage prostitution, but they took an interesting approach, which I think is they're one of the only countries who've approached it from this standpoint. Their issue was not necessarily that someone would choose to go into prostitution, but they wanted to prohibit people from sexually exploiting people in the business. So what they did is they actually went after pimps and madams. They went after people running the businesses. And so they've been very vigilant about shutting those people down and reaching out and trying to help women who, had kind of fallen into this kind of life. So they've done a lot of outreach. There's a lot of resources. So what happened in Israel is that there was a huge, and it's been written about, there have even been movies about it. In the 90s, when there was a huge influx of Jews from the former Soviet Union, there was a pretty steep rise in human trafficking and in organized crime, bringing women from the former Soviet Union there. And it wasn't just Russia and Ukraine, it was Moldova, it was everywhere in the former Soviet Union. And they were bringing women over from Eastern Europe to be prostitutes in Israel, and they essentially were keeping them as sex slaves in Israel. Part of their justification in their warped minds on this was this: they weren't Israelite women.
Oh, foreigner.
And the women were there on visas that were, essentially they kept their visas anyways, but they knew that these people couldn't stay in the country anyways. They had no legal rights. Well, they didn't have many legal rights in the country. So Israel finally cracked down on it, but it was a huge initiative. And remember, Israel doesn't have local police forces. They have a national police force. And so when the Israeli police force decided to crack down on this was a nationwide mandate. It wasn't like the city of Tel Aviv decided to crack down on it. Now, Tel Aviv was definitely the place where this was happening, but they really cracked down on it. And I've noticed in the last 12, 13 years, they have completely eradicated the at least visible signs of what was going on before, the visible, signs of massage parlors and places where everyone knew what was happening in these places. And they were essentially staffed by Eastern European women who were being beaten. And everyone knew it was a bad scene. So they really did crack down on it. What they do have still is they still have escorts, and they still have people that are engaged in prostitution, if you'd say, but they're basically saying if they're doing their business themselves, then we're not going to arrest people for engaging in that. So they basically have said that was, that's kind of how Israel's come up with that response. So I will tell you, there's a famous line, which, let me just see if I can bring it up here. According to right here, according to, this is the line from Ben Gurion. When Israel has prostitutes and thieves, will be a state just like every other, or any other. So there was an understanding that this is the price of being a country. This is the price of having a large population with people who will do things that are not necessarily for their own benefit long term. And yeah, this is part of our history going back again to the Torah. How will we approach it? So a lot of stuff to unpack there, a lot of things to think about. But again, from the Torah standpoint, this is kind of the basis for, as John said, we're not going to prohibit prostitution, but we're going to make sure that it's, number one, not encouraged, and number two, that people are not going to be hurt in the process of doing it. And look, how do we know it's not encouraged? Don't bring that money into the temple. And it says they're abhorrent to God, that money. Any questions, any comments, any further discussions about these couple lines, which I said, look, these come right after slavery, right after digging a hole when you come into in war. So these laws are just, they're not necessarily connected to each other, because look at the next one, has nothing here for us from the previous line, other than maybe you could say it's a little bit about money. There's a little money in it, maybe. Well, that'd be a reach. But here's a very famous line. You shall not deduct interest from loans to your fellow Israelites, whether in money or food or anything else that can be deducted as interest. But you may deduct interest from loans to foreigners. Do not deduct interest from loans to your fellow Israelites, so that your God Adonai may bless you in all your undertakings in the land that you are about to enter into and possess. This is the law against usury. We have a version of this, not when you loan the money to people. So you can't loan it to people. Now, partly it's because of this idea that you don't want to create a situation where your neighbors owe you money. Now, you are allowed to charge interest to non-Israelites. So this law was eventually not kept by the Israelites, even in Israel. They had to come up with a way to do business. And so by the rabbinic period, this law was not enforced. We know that. The rabbis basically said, we can't keep this law. This law works if you're farmers or nomadic people who shouldn't really have to do this. But if you're merchants and if you're running commerce and you're running goods and services over a caravan route or a merchant route from the coast, you have to be able to loan money because you don't know when you put up the money to buy the goods in another place, whether it's going to be there. It's a risk. And again, people who took that risk made money. People who loaned the money made money. And you can't have commerce without it. It's just the bottom line. And once Israel became a much more cosmopolitan and you know, commercial based, and by that I mean like mercantile, you know, a mercantilistic society, they couldn't follow this anymore. So when they had tribal areas and they had lived in tents and that kind of stuff, it worked. But when you live in a city, when you have to buy a piece of property in your town, you had to charge interest. So again, the law though was originally, it's in the Torah. So people said it's in the Torah, that allowed Jews to charge interest to other people, which is why Jews could be moneylenders. There's another issue though. That's assuming the reason that Jews could be moneylenders is because Christians follow this line too. Why? Because it's actually referred to in the Christian Bible. It's one of the few commandments that somehow carried over. Kashrut didn't carry over, Shabbat didn't carry over, but the laws of usury did. And what's interesting about it is it happened during a time when the Jews were already really not following this law themselves. I guess you could say partly it's because the Christians who were originally Jewish, who were living in that community, were probably marginalized and somewhat not doing very well from this system. How do we know that? Because Jesus talks about it a lot. Just so you understand, Jesus, if you follow Jesus's teaching, it's really hard to do business. He's the most radical socialist that we encounter in almost all of history. So it's almost impossible to have any commercial enterprise under what, if Jesus says what he says, it would be very hard to do it because he didn't want people to be engaged in commerce because he should have been worrying about the kingdom of God. So it's very hard for, so this law fit in very well with what Jesus's teachings were about this kind of stuff. Again, when you get to laws in the Christian, not laws, but teachings that emanate from Christian teaching, which is, you know, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, understand that a lot of where that comes from is a desire. And again, there are people who have different interpretations of what Jesus meant by that, but there's at least an underpinning there, which is don't worry about that kind of stuff because we got much bigger things to worry about than where your next buck is coming from. And that's really what Jesus's message was. That's why, you know, people loved it in Jesus Christ Superstar, because this whole concept of like getting back to that, you know, becoming essentially like a Jesus commune made sense to people because that's actually what's in the Christian Bible. This line, it's conducive to biblical Judaism. Again, as I said, when Jews were living in tents, it wasn't really conducive for at that period, but by that period, there were people who hated the temple. I'm talking about Jews. I'm not talking about the Gentile. They didn't care about the temple. Jews didn't like the temple. They didn't like the Roman taxes they were paying. They didn't like the commercial system there that was oppressing them. They didn't like it. And there were probably Jews who were as inspired by Jesus's message economically as they were about anything he was teaching about God. They just like the idea that you get to be freed of this system that is not allowing us to have, you know, any freedom. So this was an important law for Christians, which is why they let Jews be moneylenders, because they followed this law too. They wouldn't lend money to each other because they followed this law. They let Jews be moneylenders. And as we know, usually that worked until they owed the Jewish people too much money, which is when they kind of wiped the debts clean and kicked them out. And that was a constant balance of how do we continue to have a debt, but not too much that they'll decide, let's just either kill them. And so Jews were constantly trying to figure out how to balance that out, because that's a tough way to do business, that when you're too successful, they just decide to kill you. And that happened a lot. So eventually, of course, the Italians and the British figured out they don't have to keep this either. And so they stopped doing it. They didn't need the Jews at all then. So once they started lending and creating banks, then there was no need to have Jews in the town. But there were Jews that were in all these towns. The Merchant of Venice is historically accurate from the standpoint that there were Jews that their whole job was to figure out, how to lend money to people, how to get credit to people. And that was their job. I mean, their whole livelihood was extending letters of credit and securing funds and bringing someone's money to another person and charging interest on that. And that's what they did. And obviously that was the basis for, the Lehman Brothers. That was the basis for the Warburgs. There were a lot of Jews that were engaged in this business all the way up, obviously, to the Rothschilds and to some of the people that made it out of the ghettos. So the law comes from the Torah. This is our own law, which sometimes helped us and sometimes was used, unfortunately, in a dark way too. But again, for people who were anti-Semitic and were not liking Jews, it was very good to just say, well, that's what they do. They're the ones who charge interest. Well, technically speaking, we're not even supposed to charge interest on ourselves. But Islam, by the way, also has this law. They do. That's why you don't have Muslim banks. Well, you do, but they're not for us. Muslim banks are established to essentially lend without charging interest, which means that you don't see them. That's why you don't see the Bank of Riyadh or the Bank of, that's why you don't see Emirati banks around the world. They just buy Citibank instead. Seriously, I mean, that's what they do. They buy Citibank, but they can't own their own bank. They can't have their own banks. They can't charge interest. So they follow the Torah law in that as well, kind of. Yeah. So again, the law of usury. When you make a vow to your God Adonai, do not put off fulfilling it, for your God Adonai will require it of you, and you will have incurred guilt, whereas you incur no guilt if you refrain from vowing. Well, again, this is kol nidre. That's the word. Don't make a neder. Don't. There's the word again. Don't make vows. It's better not to, because if you do, you're going to be held accountable for it. So people would vow they were going to do something by God. How do we know? Because it says right here, don't use the pay of those people for a fulfillment of a vow. That's the word right there, neder. It's the same word. Don't. But really, again, whether you're a prostitute or not, don't make vows. Don't do it. People did it. You must fulfill what has crossed your lips and perform what you have voluntarily vowed to God Adonai, having made the promise with your own mouth. Yeah. So don't make those promises to God. This is not going to be held accountable for it. So here's an interesting law. When you enter your fellow Israelites' vineyard, you may eat as many grapes as you want until you are full, but you must not put any in your vessel or your pockets, so to speak. Yeah, you can grab something off the vineyard, but you can't put it in a bag. You can't put it in your pockets. You can't put it can't take a doggy bag. But you are allowed to do that. You're allowed to graze. Now, you can't use that as an excuse to go to the grocery store and get pieces that you want. But when it comes off the vine, you're allowed to, which is interesting because, again, basically saying, that's not considered a theft. But And again, when you enter,
Trespass.
when you enter a fellow Israelite's field of standing grain, you may pluck ears with your hand, but you must not use a sickle to your neighbor's grain, right? So you can't go in there and start cutting it down. You can pick off a couple grains. So again, there's like, if you have a field and fields, you walk through somebody's, let's not be ridiculous, but you're not allowed to go in there with the intent of cutting people's stuff down, taking it home. Now, remember, there's also laws in the Bible that say that any of the grain that falls on the ground is for the poor, right? That's the gleanings. And you have to leave the corners, the payot, you have to leave the corners standing so that the poor can come in afterwards and cut it and get at that. So there's actually stuff that the poor got to have, but this isn't talking about the leket, the gleanings or the payah, the corners. This is the other stuff. This is you're walking through. You're not collecting stuff. You're just walking through, and you're hungry for a snack. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Out in the Ranch Golf Course.
yeah.
out in,
Ventura. Oh,
Ventura
New Mexico, yeah.
Has or had orange trees along many of the fairways.
Uh-huh.
And it was always okay to grab an orange.
Huh.
If you're playing.
Yeah.
golf. But you couldn't,
Take a bag.
exactly. It was okay to grab one. No, seriously.
Yeah.
You were told that.
Yeah.
Grab an orange, but you can't take that in.
Yeah. Yeah. And in those picking places, if you pick one and you pick one, that's one thing. But if you're going to pick a bunch, you got to have a bag and put it in there. You can say, I want to taste to see if these are good. Look, I mean, nowadays I see grocery stores, they'll put a little plate of the grapes there and you can taste whether they're good or not. I mean, that's fair. That's a fair question to wonder, hey, are these any good? And so they do that a lot now. I've seen grocery stores put those little plate of grapes out there. I think Whole Foods does it.
Farmers market do that. all the
Yeah.
time.
And again, it's like, it makes sense, but yeah, you're not allowed to go through and cut stuff down. That's not good. So that's the end of chapter 23, but it's, again, what's that break for? I don't know. Because the next line, again, has nothing to do with the previous line, but look at this one. A man takes a woman into his household as his wife. And again, I mean, let's see what the note says. A participant. Okay, well, it's basically saying that the word here is man, and that's all it says. A man takes a woman and an isha, right? And becomes her husband. She fails to please him because he finds something obnoxious about her. What?
No,
That's not the translation you have.
no,
What?
this is the proper translation.
Okay, what's the
A
translation?
man takes a wife and possesses her.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what it says in mine too.
She did that.
Exactly.
Yeah, well,
She fails to please him because he finds something obnoxious about her.
yeah, well, they saw the word obnoxious. Yeah. And he writes her a bill of divorce, right? It's called cretot. It doesn't say get there, it says cretot. It's a bill of divorcement or a bill of selling. We call it a get today. Hands it to her and sends her away from his house. So now, before we get to the but, okay, so that's all. Okay, that's what happens in the divorce, right? That's not what they're talking about, right? That's why it's just percent. That's why there's like semicolon. So however you want to understand their marriage, the fact is that he doesn't want to be married to her anymore. Now he has to give her a bill of divorce. We read about that before. We talked about that before last week. Gives it to her. And again, he gives it to her. She doesn't give it to him. He gives it to her. That allows her to leave now, not be his wife anymore. Whatever the terms are of that financially, that's what he has to give her. That's not why they're talking about this. She leaves his household and becomes the wife of another man. Again, the note here is essentially the same word, ish. That's all it's saying. Then this latter man rejects her, writes her a bill of divorcement, hands it to her, and sends her away from his household. Or the man dies who had last taken her as a wife. Okay, now she gets divorced from the second husband. This is, by the way, yes, but wait till you get to this one, because this you've never seen before. I promise you, Phil. Well, if you've seen it, there's no law for it in America. Then the first husband who divorced her shall not take her into his household to become his wife again, since she has been defiled, for that would be abhorrent to Adonai. You must not bring sin upon the land that your God Adonai is giving you as a heritage. So I will tell you, that's the end of that law. The next law is about something else. So let's just look to see if there's any commentary. What is going on here? Let's just make sure if Rashi says anything here. Nope. Rashi doesn't have anything on this that you need to know necessarily that adds anything to it, I would say. Let me just look at one other thing. Let's see what the Talmudic commentaries are on this. Let's see, Talmud. Let's see. So, nope. Nope, it's not there. Let's see. Let me just see if it's here. Nope. This is all about betrothal. So what are they talking about here? What is the issue here? What's going on here? It doesn't say it in here. What's going on here? Why is this an issue? Why is this an issue? A woman married to a guy, she leaves him, divorced, done. She goes to somebody else, and she can't come back to the other husband. She can't be remarried to him. Now, that doesn't mean that she can't be remarried to him if she divorces him. And this happens a lot. People get divorced and they remarry their spouse. That can happen. That's allowed. But what can't happen is that she's married to somebody else and then comes back to her husband. Now you'd be saying, well, that's not what normally happens. Yeah, it is. When we hear about people who get remarried, usually it's like, she was my first wife and my third wife. There was a second wife in the middle there. Or if there wasn't a second wife, there might have been some long-term relationship and the person decides, you know what, turns out my first wife was really nice, or vice versa, whatever it is. I'm just saying. But usually there is a relationship in the middle. So if you divorce somebody and then you decide you want to remarry him, it's not necessarily here, at least, an issue. So what are they talking about? Why is this an issue? So Philip, you're involved in this. What do you think they're worried about? What? That's could be part of it, but assuming here, there doesn't even say that they had kids. What do you think the issue is?
They have to do with property. I really don't know.
So here's the issue. The issue that they're trying to prevent is this. I mean, this is how we understand it. They're actually trying to prevent people from running scams on people. In that somebody would she'd be married to somebody, get divorced from that guy, leave that guy, go to another guy, and then go back to the other guy. The reason is that could be essentially, I'm not saying it's prostitution, but it's kind of close. Essentially where you're having your wife go live with another guy to get his property and then come back to you.
That's what I said,
That's
property.
it's property. It's also money. Yeah. So that's what they're probably dealing with, which is people that are essentially running a scam, running a scheme to try to defraud somebody, because they're essentially saying, well, we understand there might be emotional issues here, but why would somebody send off their wife and then claim that they are okay with her now? Now, again, there's people who fall out of love with each other or realize, like we said, you know what, things were pretty good. That was a really good relationship I had. I thought the grass is greener. Turns out it's not. That's normal. That's be the normal emotional thing. And in a society where we have laws, you know, people would look at that and say, oh, what's going on here? Now, it doesn't mean that, and I don't know what cases Philip's been involved with, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people who get married to somebody to essentially steal their property, because that happens a lot. We know that it happens a lot. And unfortunately, you know, you can almost see the target sometimes coming where you go, oh, that guy's about to get fleeced. Yeah, but they had kids at least. But yes, there are times where we go, oh man, that guy's gonna get him.
Where not this happened, but where the woman who married my client did so only, in my opinion, based on the facts, to, after a number of years, divorce him and take as much property as she did.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. We know, we know it happens.
That's the second time she's done it. He was
Yeah.
her second husband.
Yes. So what's also going on here too is the fear that this will happen too. Because it essentially said it in a not. Well, it says right here, or the man dies who is last taken her as his wife. Well, how did he die? You know, sounds like Dateline. This is a Dateline episode. No, but this is another fear, which is that she's going to go marry somebody, kill him, and take his money, and then go back to her husband. Yeah.
One of the common scams in California is, and usually the men who do this, they'll marry a woman who owns a house, convince the woman to put them on title. Then after a period of time, assuming the value of the house has gone up, they'll get divorced and take their share from the increased value. And I've seen that happen multiple times. It's a common scam.
When you were first reading that, I thought that's so unfair to the woman, but then the context of how you explained that makes complete sense.
Yeah. Well, understand that we have laws. We have a society here that's structured much differently now than this was, which was coming out of it when this was written. Deuteronomy, we're still dealing with a society that's moving from a tribal tent situation to a more cosmopolitan city. We're kind of in between at this point. But for societies that are figuring this out, or still not like where we are today, that are still like this, understand that this is an issue. Here, I'll show you. This is our closest kind of. This is an article in the Atlantic from a few years ago. Islam's one. Well, this is on the Atlantic. It's one of their features. This was what was happening in Afghanistan. With the comeback to democracy, the Shiite tradition of sekha, or temporary marriages, is returned. The contract of marriage allows a man to get married with the consent of the Muslim religion for a certain amount of time, from one night to a few months. Since he practices sekha, he has married more than 100 times. He plans on marrying between 2 to 5 times a month, depending on his money situation. Yeah. I didn't want to get to that part, but I just showed it to you. I didn't do it through the Apple News. And the fact that the legal age for girls to marry is 9 years old. So understand that this is what's happening today. I don't know, that was 2007, but it hasn't stopped happening. So these laws that we have are to prevent this kind of thing from happening. Why? Because it's happening in 2007. That's why. So, people are saying, look, this prostitution issue, we already read it. It's in the Bible. We know that it can happen. Let's regulate the prostitution so that we avoid this, which is using marriage as a way to, and again, what I just showed you is a well-known practice within Islam. It's not like a secret. But in order for Islam to say, well, we're not allowing prostitution, but we allow this, I mean, they're not bragging about it. Don't get me wrong. It's not like they're saying, yeah, we have a way of having prostitution, but that's what you could have as a solution. That is what's happening as a solution. And Judaism wants to prevent that from happening to some extent, because there's an understanding that this cheapens, it really demeans what marriage is, which is an understanding that it's ridiculous. Well, it's difficult to say if we're assuming that she's maybe in on the scheme, maybe it's not so much like that. But but there is an understanding that she must be in on the scheme if she comes back to her husband, because she doesn't have to go back to him. There's no, she wasn't forced to go back to him. So if she's not allowed to go back to him, they're basically saying, don't run that scheme. We're not going to allow that scheme. So this law actually prevents this 1 hour marriage situation from happening. So, because if you can do a 1 hour marriage, then you can have somebody being married multiple times to the same woman and saying, no, look, and then of course you can have abuses of it. You can have the scheming and ways of cheating people out of stuff. And it makes the whole concept of marriage a joke, which again, to some extent, marriage is seen as a way of protecting people from losing their property. Let's face it. It's protecting women so that they will have property in the case of divorce. And it's to some extent protecting a man from saying everything that you own is now this woman's because you were married to her for a certain amount of time. So marriage is, to some extent, as Philip will attest, a way of protecting society from collapse
So,
economically on itself. So it's a weird situation. And for people who, who are involved in it, this is to prevent egregious, abuses of this. So that is the prevention of that. Here's an interesting law in verse 5. Let's look at it. When a man has newly taken a woman, does it say possess there too, John? Okay, well, because it's the same word, yikach, but it doesn't say ba'alah. When a man has newly taken a woman into his household as his wife, you shall not go out with the army or be assigned to it for any purpose. You shall be exempt from 1 year for the sake of his household, to give happiness to the woman he has taken. Now, we already read that a man is supposed to say that he just got married. He wasn't supposed to be taken into battle. But here it says specifically that he's exempt for 1 year for the sake of his household. Now, it doesn't say so that he can get her pregnant, but the assumption is that's part of what is happening by making her happy. But she's supposed to be happy. That's the actual word. It doesn't say to impregnate her, it's to make her happy. So maybe that's part of it, but he's supposed to bring her joy. And again, I'm sure the commentary on this.
That law's not following that.
Definitely not.
Try to get out of it.
No way.
So yeah. Yeah. So yeah, they kind of, the Talmud goes a little bit in a different way on some of this, but I mean, it goes into other possibilities. Again, what's going on here is to prevent people from essentially, not having a chance to have a child. A man is obligated to provide his wife with, well, actually saw that note here. He has to provide her with water, food. No, that's not it. No, he has to provide her with food, clothing, and with a child.
Could it also be that you didn't want to have instant widows? I mean, the idea being that, you get married, he goes off to battle, and he's dead a week later. And that would not be good for society. No,
it also isn't fair to the woman because she's no longer a virgin, so she doesn't have the same value.
Right.
Let's face it, she doesn't have the same value. and she really was not married for very long. But she gets the worst situation, which is she doesn't have a child. She's no longer married. She doesn't have the same value as an unmarried virgin. And so, yeah, it puts her at a real risk, and especially if she's married for a week. As I said before, 2 weeks ago, a woman who couldn't have children with her husband, even in the Orthodox world today, at this very moment, she'll be encouraged to divorce him, with the hope that if she's married to somebody else, that she would have a baby. Now, today, there are Orthodox Jews who will engage in vitro fertilization and, try different forms of sciences to help in procreating. But traditionally, and again, in some communities where they don't want to rely on that or surrogacy, they'll basically say, go marry somebody else. So they'll give people a few years and they'll say, look, if it's not happening and it's really important to the people to have children, then they'll encourage them to separate. Doesn't mean they have to. The Lubavitcher Rebbe never had kids, right? The last Lubavitcher Rebbe never had children with his wife. No one forced him to get divorced. He never had kids, and there's no new Rebbe. So they don't want that to happen. But at the same time, if it happens, they don't force people to be divorced from their spouse. But if somebody wanted to be, and if it's causing pain for them that they aren't having kids, they're allowed to be divorced without anybody making any judgments on it. And they would encourage the person to do that and not to feel like there's going to be any bad mark on them. I will tell you that it's tougher if you haven't had children to find another spouse, because people are worried that you're infertile and they don't want to take that risk. So it's not easy, but it's one of the reasons why, again, Judaism's always allowed for divorce, because, again, not to stop people from procreating or having that opportunity if they wanted to. Now, the next law has nothing to do with that. A handmill or upper millstone shall not be taken in pawn, for that would be taking someone's life in pawn. Now, you're like, what the heck does that mean? Well, there's certain things that you're not allowed to pawn, and you're not allowed to take in pawn. You can never take this as pawn. If somebody needs the money, well, you'll see it right here. Well, it doesn't say it here, but it'll say you must help your fellow man so that he doesn't get to a situation where he has to pawn the very things that he needs for his own livelihood. If he pawns his millstone, he can't do his work. It's like telling somebody you can't pawn your car if you have to have your car to work. You can't take away the person's livelihood, a way for them to do what they need to do to earn any money. So again, it's literally taking away their livelihood. Or what's your translation there say, John? Taking someone's life in pawn. It says in pawn. Okay, it's the same.
Makes sense. I didn't know what a handmill was until I looked it up.
What does yours say, Mary? Yeah. So that's a similar idea. You can't take away their life. And that's the word that we talked about yesterday, nefesh, right? The idea that a person is their soul, right? It's their soul. That's right. But nefesh is that soul part of us that we said is one of the words for soul, but it's also sometimes kind of used for a person, someone's personhood. Next line, if a party is found to have been kidnapped, the word nefesh there again, and then enslaved or sold, a fellow Israelite, that kidnapper shall die. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. So kidnapping, death for the kidnapper. That is a death penalty. So you talk about rape, death penalty. Kidnapping, death penalty. It's not just killing somebody. Kidnapping is considered one of those things.
Question.
Go right to death. Yeah.
So says the fellow Israelite, there is, so is that Israelite kidnapping another Israelite, or is that just anybody
Well, interesting. It's an interesting question, right? Because let's see if any of the commentaries will say that. Yeah, here it is. Whoa, I went past it. It was there. Hold it a second. Yeah, here it is. In Exodus, nothing is mentioned about the nationality of the kidnapped person, because again, there's a similar law in Exodus chapter 21. Here, the nationality is not mentioned in Exodus. Here, the circumstances are defined more clearly. I am among his brethren, excluding Gentiles and even Edomites, descendants of Yitzhak, because remember, Edom was Isaac's son too, who elsewhere were addressed even by Moses' brother. An alternate interpretation, we had only heard about the first verse dealing with this subject. I might have thought that even an 8-day-old baby is included in the legislation, i.e. such a young baby had been kidnapped. The Torah is therefore adding the word me'achi from his brethren, meaning that a baby under 30 days is not included, as we're not sure he's healthy enough to grow up to be a man. So, oh yeah, no, these are 100% like, why are these issues? Because they're still issues. So are you allowed to take somebody else who's not an Israelite, right? Now, here's the issue. The Bible's already told us you can. Not only has it told us you can, it told us we're supposed to. When? In Deuteronomy, when it talked about going to war against other people. You kill the men, but you don't kill the kids and the moms. Well, you do if they've already had kids, but you take the population that you can as slaves. Why? Because otherwise you kill them. You're not supposed to kill them. So clearly you can do that to somebody that you go to battle with. They can't say that you can't do that because they've already told us to do that. Yes. So in this situation, look, the Jewish law evolved over time to say you can't kidnap anybody, even because eventually in battle you didn't kidnap people in battle. Yeah,
Of course you did.
not it never happened. We didn't,
Kidnapping or taking slaves, I mean, all.
we didn't,
Tomato, tomato.
for the last 2,000 years, it never had, Jews didn't do it. So by the time the Jews were writing the Talmud, it didn't happen. It was like, it's a moot point. It's like, how's that going to happen? It's happening to us. It would happen to us. And you couldn't do anything about it. So here's a weird thing in Jewish history. So we didn't really talk that much about it because we didn't have an army. You know, after the Romans, we didn't have an army where this was even relevant. So there wasn't that much about it. Jews, on the other hand, were regularly victims of kidnapping and hostage taking, and we are now. The reason is because the Gentiles knew that we'd pay for it. We were well known to have paid for Jews that were ransomed, even Jews that we didn't know. So what happened when pirates would take a ship is they would single out the Jews, and those Jews would oftentimes be saved. How do we know? Because they wrote about it. They would save the Jewish captives. They'd sail into the next town that they went to, the next city that the ship went to, and they would ransom off the Jewish slaves to the people in that town. So if there was in the Mediterranean, they went to some Ottoman port and they auctioned off the Jews to those people, and they paid it because it's a mitzvah to pay for ransoming the captives. So it happened all the time. It saved Jewish lives, the fact that they knew that they would do it. It is essentially, again, what the argument that Hamas is using right now, which is that keeping these hostages will save their lives, or again, get thousands of Palestinians out of Israeli jails by doing a prisoner swap for them. So that's what the equation is there. So people know that Jews will do anything they can to rescue one of their own. It's still the case. That doesn't mean that every Jewish life is going to be protected. It didn't help Daniel Pearl. If somebody wants to kill a Jew, they're going to do it, and they're going to videotape it now too. But on this, why 200 Jews got kidnapped and held hostage right now at this very moment is because they know that Israel is going to. I mean, we don't know for sure, but probably the main reason why Israel hasn't gone into Gaza right now is because they're trying to get those people out. I mean, that's at least possible. I mean, if not most likely, I'm 90% sure that's what it is, but I don't know. I'm not getting debriefed by the IDF, but that's very possible. And I'm laughing about it because this is the equation that's going on right now, right at this moment, is that kidnappers are literally trying to figure out whether they can get something from Israel in this equation right now. So it's still an issue. I don't know what to tell you other than Israel has not been part of this, or the Jewish people have not been part of this discussion until 1948. And what Israel has done in 1948 is never take children hostage. That I can tell you. It's never happened. So I can't believe that we're having this discussion right now, but we are. This is what's happening at this very minute. So
it's interesting though, Lori brings up, if a man is found to have kidnapped a fellow Israel, right?
Yeah.
If I kidnap you,
yep,
doesn't say anything about kidnapping a non-Israel.
because as we said, you can't really, especially, you can't make it prohibited because in battle you were commanded to do that essentially. So you can't make it illegal for somebody to do, for an Israelite to do it to a non-Israelite, because it was allowed in battle. Not only was it allowed, it was encouraged.
Aren't Jews fighting each other?
Well, you could make the argument that if an Israelite was fighting a Judite, another Israelite, they couldn't do that. Yes. So in that case, 100% couldn't do it. If it was during the times when the Israelite kings were fighting the Judite kings, 100% they couldn't do that. You're right. They did go to war against each other. So they were fighting each other, killing each other. But yeah, you're not supposed, it's according to this, you can't. Look, by the time this was written, if this was written in the 6th century, there was no Israel kingdom anymore. They were already exiled. If this was written during the time of Josiah, they're already gone. But yeah, you would have said that if you know, but again, kidnapping, we read about earlier in Exodus, it's punishable by death. There, it doesn't go into the nuances of Israelite or non-Israelite. There, it's just you can't, well, you can look at rather than hit the page, I don't want to go up right now, but read me what somebody who has the book in front of them, look at what somebody read to me, what does Exodus 21:16 say? Somebody flip to Exodus 21:16. Well, like I said, I don't want to lose this page. Exodus 21:16.
And he will come in and settle with him. Or if he be found in his hand.
She's reading.
Yeah, that's it. Mary just said, someone who sells a man shall be put to death. It doesn't say Israelite, non-Israelite. It says shall be put to death. So again, this is a little different, and the rabbis who made that comment pointed out that it's different. So,
How did you know that?
because it said, the note here said, look at 21. I did not remember it was 21:16. I knew it was in Exodus. I knew it was in Mishpatim. I did not know it was 21:16. In the case of skin infection, which we read about in Leviticus, there's a little note, Leviticus 13. Yeah. Be careful, right? That's Tzara'at. Be careful, you do exactly what the Levitical priest instruct you. Take care to do as I've commanded you. Yeah, back in Leviticus. So there it's basically saying, check Leviticus, which again, they probably didn't think we'd be able to hyperlink back to Leviticus chapter 13 and see what it says about Sa'arat. So that's a little line about Sa'arat in the middle of this. And this line goes with it though. Well, remember what God Adonai did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt, because what? She got hit with the Sa'arat, right? And so remember what happened to her, because even Miriam got hit with it and had to be out of the camp for 7 days, right? So now we go back to the laws of commerce and the laws of taking stuff from people in pledge. When you make a loan of any sort to your compatriot, you must not enter the house to seize the pledge. You must remain outside while the party to whom you made the loan brings out the pledge to you, which seems to mean that, again, you can make a loan, not on everything. You can't pawn your basic items that you need for life. You can't pawn your coat and you can't pawn your millstone. And there's other things that we read about, but you can hold as collateral certain things. But when you do, you're not allowed to go in and take it out of the guy's house. You wait outside and let him, again, obviously to stop him from being humiliated. Because look at this. If that party is needy, you shall not go to sleep in that pledge. You must return the pledge at sundown, that its owner may sleep in the cloth and bless you, and it will be to your merit before your God Adonai. So, look, you're not allowed to take away stuff that people need to live. And trust me, they're saying, if you do the right thing, God will be happy. Right? Here's another law connected to that. You shall not abuse a needy or destitute laborer, whether a fellow Israelite or a stranger in one of the communities in your land. You must pay out the wages due on the same day before the sun sets, for the worker is needy and urgently depends on it. Else a cry to Adonai will be issued against you, and you will incur guilt. Now, does that mean that you have to pay people every day? No. In the old days you did, but not anymore. Nowadays you can have a pay period. Israel has pay periods. Jewish employers can have pay periods. They can pay people every 2 weeks, once a month, every week, whatever. But you're not allowed to hold the money that you owe them overnight if you owe it to them on that day. So if you tell someone I'm paying you on the 14th, you pay them on the 14th. Period. Now, if you have a problem, you have to make an exception and you don't have the money, you can talk to the person, give them a warning. You know, you're not held up, you know, it's not like the end, you know, you're out of business if you do this, but it's not the way you're supposed to do business, holding on to people's wages. It is considered by Jewish law, again, it's a violation of the Torah to do that. You are guilty. You are guilty if you've done that. And this is a really important thing, which is, again, when someone works for you, you don't play a game and say, well, I'll come back, you know, come back in another couple of days and I'll pay you. This is, it's a law for the employer. It's a law that protects, you know, workers and also makes sure that lawyers don't take it. I mean, lawyers, people don't take advantage of laborers, that they don't hold their wages. It's a very serious law. I mean, I have been on both sides of that, and I also always tell people, and I always, for myself, I make sure that if I tell someone I'm going to pay them their salary on a certain day, they're going to get their salary. And our temple's done that for employees, and yeah, you can't have people crying out to God because of what you did to them, which is hold up their wages. So again, you don't have to pay them every day, but you have to pay them. So it's an interesting, there's not a lot in the Torah about employer relations. There's not really a lot. This is here though. This is real important. It's interesting because the Christian Bible talks about this too. They talk about paying a laborer and you know, paying somebody. There's some parables that deal with this issue of how you pay people, and some interesting kinds of views on that from Jesus's time as well, which they were trying to follow the Torah in those days and trying to figure out how to pay people, and it's always been an issue. It's always been something that people have been advocating for fair wages and payment to be on time and everything else, which is why Jews have been leaders in the labor movements in this country, and why again, it's considered a matter of justice for us, a matter of tzedek. Any comments, questions? Any stuff right here? And let's take a look at this line right here. Parents shall not be put to death for children, nor children be put to death for parents. They shall each be put to death only for their own crime. So we read Ezekiel telling us that children will not be responsible for parents' crimes, and parents won't be responsible for kids' crimes. Here, it's specifically talking about death, which is death penalty cases. The Torah is pretty clear that children are not killed for their parents' crimes or vice versa. But what's interesting is the book of Ezekiel says that we're not even held responsible by his period of time, another 100 years or so after this, 75 years after this. Ezekiel's saying we're not even held accountable for the sins of our parents. We're not even going to be punished for God for the sins of our parents, because clearly we can't have that intergenerational punishment anymore, especially when we're not on our land anymore. But at this point, there's again an interesting law, which is that a parent can't be put to death for their child, and child can't be put to death for parent. By the way, the reason that this is a law is because that was not the case in every culture. People could be put to death for the sins of their parents or the crimes of their parents. I don't want to say sins, but for the crime that your parent had done, you could have been put to death in certain cultures. So that's why this law is here. So there was maybe, as I said, accountability, fact that there was intergenerational, until Ezekiel says we're not going to do that anymore. God's not going to hold us responsible anymore. There was a sense in the Bible, especially again in Deuteronomy, that, yeah, there's intergenerational guilt and responsibility, but it's not for the death penalty. There's a limit to it.
We incorporated this into our Constitution. Can't have a bill of attainder.
Yeah.
When we just literally took it right out.
Yeah. My guess is the British had done that already, but I'm not sure. I don't know enough about it to say that the British, but I have a feeling that law we might have gotten from the British. I don't know. I'm not positive about that, but you look at, yeah. I mean, you shall not subvert the rights of the stranger or the fatherless. You shall not take a widow's garment and pawn. Well, that's something that, is connected to the next line. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and that your God Adonai redeemed you from there. Therefore, do I enjoin you to observe this commandment. Which again, remember where you came from. Remember that you were completely vulnerable. And what we're going to tell you is, don't let this happen in your own culture. Don't let people be marginalized or put in a situation where they have no rights or no power at all. When you reap, here it is right here. When you reap the harvest in your field and overlook a sheaf in the field, do not turn your back to get it. It shall go to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, in order that your God Adonai may bless you in all your undertakings. When you beat the fruit down of your olive trees, do not go over them again, so that the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, you can get it. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, do not pick it over again. That shall go to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Always remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore do I enjoin you to observe this commandment. There's the line again. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt. And that's literally the same line. I mean, it's literally reminded that you were, remember that you were a slave. So what's the lesson of Egyptian bondage? Why is it repeated over and over again? so that we don't treat people as if they can be like a slave, right? You take away all their rights. Remember that experience. What? What? What do you mean? Mean that they took slaves from other people? Well, again, they're talking about the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow that are in your midst, not people that you've gone to war against. Again, there's the only expectation that you're going to treat people as slaves are essentially people that you've beaten in war. Otherwise, yeah, you can't go to the stranger who's living in your midst. That's the word, right? A ger is a stranger that lives in your midst. You're not allowed to take them and make them your slave. You're not allowed to go to an orphan and take them and make them your slave. You can't go to a widow or to a woman, again, who is no longer married and take her and make her your slave. Because in other societies, those were the people that were oftentimes made to be slaves. And I don't mean like 2,000 years ago, I mean today, that those people were essentially taken in as slaves. Now, again, it says the stranger, which means it's not just Israelites, it's also a ger. It's also a person who's not from amongst your people. So it's not, we understand the ger to be someone who's not an Israelite. Okay, that's not me, that's the people who've interpreted this and understood it for thousands of years, that a ger is that. Today we use the ger, a totally different word. It's a convert. The word for convert today in Judaism is a ger. It's not what it meant in the Bible. We know that that's not a convert, but interestingly, we call the convert the stranger in our midst, the person who came from the outside, who's now part of the community. In the old days, it meant that they were living amongst you. Today, we understand it as that they converted to be amongst us, that they've chosen to be amongst us. And because we're not just a community anymore that has a set of rules, we're a religion, you can understand why, again, by the rabbinic period, the word ger meant a convert, not a stranger. They never understood it ever again of being a stranger. Well, I shouldn't say never again. Now in Israel, they're starting to try to figure out what rights people have in the country who are not citizens in the country, which is an interesting question. So again, if you're a Jew, you're automatically allowed to be a citizen. So that is why it's become a little bit of an issue today. Now, we'll get into this chapter because we have a few more minutes. When there is a dispute between two parties and they go to law and a decision is rendered declaring the one in the right and the other in the wrong, if the guilty one is to be flogged, the magistrate shall have the person lie down and shall supervise the giving of lashes by count as warranted by the offense. So this is the laws in the Torah that allow for makot, of lashes. This is lashes. This means that there was punishment monetarily, there was capital punishment, and there was, again, this punishment of lashes. So what happens when a person is lashed? Here it goes. The guilty one may be given up to 40 lashes, but no more, lest being flogged further to excess, your peer be degraded before your eyes. So 40 lashes was the maximum, according to the Torah. What happens? The worst crime you could commit that would require the most amount of lashes can't go higher than that. So really, by the rabbinic period, it was 39 lashes. You can't really go to 40 because that would be too much. But 40 lashes. Where do they get 40 lashes from? That's a wonderful question. Now, part of it, of course, is that 40 is a symbolic number, right? But I think there's actually even a, let's see. So they're talking about flogging people who are committing crimes that are not death penalty cases, but they are let me just see if this is about flogging somebody who, so that they don't have to be executed. Yeah, I will tell you this. There is so much law about flogging in the Talmud that there's an entire tractate. Right? There's an entire tractate of well, it's not just no tractate in the Talmud is about what it says it's about, but it actually
Once you're flogged, are you at your punishment? You don't have to go.
correct. So here's the tractate right here. Makot. It's a tractate in the Mission of the Talmud. It's the 5th volume of Nezikin. Makot deals with laws of the Beit Din and the punishments that they administer, which again, some of it's found in Sanhedrin, which is about the courts. So these are the things that are in there. Again, the last part of it is why it's called Makot. The 3rd chapter of the Tractate Makot enumerates 59 offenses, each entailing lashes. Of these, 3 are marital sins of priests, 4 are prohibited intermarriages, 7 are sexual relations of an incestuous nature, 8 are violations of dietary laws, 12 are various violations of negative precepts. Yeah, I'm not going to go through all of these. If you want to read more about what is in Makot, you can read about what's a Makot. Again, it's 40 is considered to be like a complete number, right? And here it says right here, 39 is the maximum number. But the convict must be examined as to his physical ability to endure the full count without endangering his life. So you weren't supposed to go to 40, which is why 39 becomes the maximum amount. So again, they actually had to make sure the guy could actually survive that many. The convict is bound in a bent position to a post, and the public executioner administers the punishment with a leather strap while one of the judges recites the appropriate scriptural verses. So anyone guilty of a sin which is punished by this, again, karet may be cleared by flagellation. That's so karet is also excommunication. The author of this midrash said if the commission, yeah, so basically, yeah, if you want to read more about Makot, you can read about it. Again, it's one of the tractates. It's in the Tractate of Damages. This is all about civil law. And Nezikin, it's literally damages, but it's all kinds of court, all kind of legal issues. That whole tractate is about, well, it's what it's about, but it's not about other, it's about a lot of other stuff. Here's Nashim, which is the tractate for Philip and those who study marital law, family law. This is the law. It's called women, but it's not just about women. It's got the laws of ketubot. It's got the laws of sota, which is how to find if someone's a adulteress, gitin, which are the contracts of divorce, the kiddushin, marriage, for marriage law. So again, it starts off with things like holidays. These are the sections of the Talmud. So yeah, most people study these four.
Number 40 in the Torah, the inner meaning is the ascent from one level to the next higher one.
Yeah, it's considered like a holy number. Like again, so like 7 is 7 steps of creation. 10 is also sometimes a number of holiness. 40. So yeah, so what you're saying is sometimes 40 there's 40 steps, but it's not always steps. It's like the 40 days of the flood, 40 days of or 40 years that the people were in. But yeah, 40 oftentimes is attached to, like, you can go up 40, like the 40 days of the high holidays, the 30 days of Elul, then going into the first 10 days of Tishrei, or 40 days of repentance. Moses was Mount Sinai for 40 days. So it's a way of becoming pure or clean, sometimes over 40 steps. But yeah, 40 is oftentimes a symbolic number for either ascending, and they're saying ascending, but also again purifying or fixing things, or again getting people to the holier place. So after 40 lashes, they're fixed. was probably again to the point where they were, yeah, it's not good. Part of the Jewish history, right? You know this, Philip, the guy who abolished flogging in the US Navy was a Jewish guy. You know that? Jewish guy was responsible for stopping flogging in the Navy, because it was pretty much a that's what people did. It was flogging. Here's the dude right here. Right here. Uriah P. Levy. He was a naval officer, real estate investor, and philanthropist. Veteran of the War of 1812, the first Jewish Commodore in the US Navy. There he is right there, Uriah P. Levy. He purchased Monticello so that they could turn it into a museum. He loved Thomas Jefferson. I mean, he lived after Thomas Jefferson, but he was an admirer of him. And here's what he did while he was in the Navy. He was instrumental in abolishing flogging in the US Navy. Although his position was considered controversial at the time, he also helped gain the support of US Congress in passing an anti-flogging bill in 1850. He spent only 16 of his 49 years in active service. The rest of the time he was waiting orders. I mean, you can get called up like the reserves. He became wealthy by investing in New York City's real estate market. That's true. So, yeah. And then he bought Monticello for, how much did he buy it for? $2,700, which is equivalent to $79,000 today. Just so you know, it's worth $79,000 today. So again, he gave it to the American people. Yeah, pretty interesting, right? So that's Uriah P. Levy. But yeah, flogging was pretty much still done by the British Navy at the time. Like, we were jokes because we had gotten rid of flogging. I mean, I've read about that Uriah Levy was thought of, he was a wimp because he wanted America to stop flogging its sailors. It was pretty much standard practice on the Navy, every Navy in those days. Let's get to this law though. This is really important. You shall not muzzle an ox while it's threshing. I told you that last week, right? We would get to another law about animals, which is it's not fair to them. If they're working, they're allowed to eat. And so you have to allow them. And it's another example of our laws of treatment of animals. When brothers dwell together and one of them dies and leaves no offspring, the wife of the deceased shall become that of another party outside, shall not become a part of another party outside the family. Her husband's brother shall unite with her. You shall take her as his wife and perform the lever's duty. The first child that she bears shall be accounted to the dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out in Israel. And that is the law of Yibum, which is one of the tractates in that family area. I passed over it, but Yevamot is all about how this law was going to be enforced, especially at a time when people were no longer living in a tent and couldn't really infect this. So the whole concept of it was so that your person would not leave the world without.
My translation says son. There's no son.
I would say that that's an accurate translation. The point is that, yeah, the son would carry on the father's name. And that's the only way they could do it. Now, again, we would say that law is insane. Because again, the idea that a woman had to marry a guy, her brother-in-law, so that she could have a baby is essentially a surrogacy situation. It's a sperm donor. Now, that was for the first baby. The baby after that was his baby. So he wasn't constantly impregnating this woman and giving children in the name of his brother. But the concept behind it was so that a person would not be like they never existed. I will tell you, the Talmud had a problem with this. They knew it was a problem. They didn't like the law in the sense that they knew it didn't make really sense when you didn't have a tribe anymore. But the whole concept of this is you can't have a tribe disappear. If the tribe doesn't have people, then the tribe is gone. And then what do you do? it messes up all of society. So they knew that by the time that they were trying to keep this law in the Talmudic period, in the rabbinic period, they were like, this doesn't make any sense. Can't do it. Can't make somebody have a baby with somebody else that's not theirs. And so they really tried to figure out how not to make this happen, how to encourage it not to happen. Today, the law is not followed in the Orthodox world. Let me make it clear. They do not follow this law. They don't want it to be followed. We understand that it doesn't need to be followed. Let me make it clear. There's not people walking around today doing this. I shouldn't say no one. There's always people there's probably weird people that are not Jewish that are following this law too, because it's in the Bible. We'll make that clear. So just so you know, would they follow this law? The Karaites, they would, and they probably, again, there aren't many Karaites left. They probably also, once they were not living in Israel or living in a tribal situation, probably weren't encouraging this. In San Francisco or in the Karaites that lived in the Crimea, probably weren't keeping this law as well, but they were probably more hesitant to give it up because the Bible seems pretty strong about it. It's only when you get into the Talmud that you have a whole tractate about the laws of Yevamot. And again, as I said, there's a lot of stuff in Yevamot that has nothing to do with the laws of Yibum, the laws of the Levirate. We call the Levirate child. That's the lever's duty is the Levirate marriage. Does your commentary have anything on there, John, that you want to share in your? Yes.
I think this dovetails perfectly with 24:1. A man takes a wife and possesses her. No. The note for 25:5 says that it has more to do with inheritance law. Right? So she doesn't have a child, right? So the possession, right? So it's very antiquated in regards to that. That now the brother-in-law inherits the wife. To do what you said, which is keep the line going.
Yes, but the weird thing about that, though, the caveat, that would be one thing if it was like just taking care of her. But it says specifically, it's so that first child carries on the dad's name. That child is not the child of the husband. It's the child of his dead brother. That's the thing that's so remarkably like not within the tribe and not just, it's not just a matter of possession or, property or ownership, but that the legacy, because you could make the argument, well, she's part of the family still, so shouldn't really leave. But this idea that the husband's name is maintained, so his legacy doesn't die out, which to me is beyond property. It's saying that, okay, fine, the brother is still alive, the property is still in the family, the tribe is still whole. No, it's actually that some piece of this guy continues on.
Yeah, you have a problem bringing that in today.
Oh yeah, you have a lot of, which by the way, just so you know, that doesn't mean that people haven't married their sister-in-law. I know that's happened many times.
Divorce,
Yeah.
Gonna be Bible for, that son,
Who is?
the brother, if they.
Oh. Yeah. Well, yeah, but she's saying if they got divorced, if the brother-in-law is no longer with them, no longer with the woman, who's responsible for it? Well, the tribe would still be responsible for it, obviously, but it is a way for that guy's name to still be there. So, but wait, there's a law, and we'll finish with this. This is the out. Even in the Torah, there's an out, and this is the rule of chalitza, which we read about in the book of Ruth. We actually read about this thing happening, which again is not the normal thing to happen, believe it or not, but it is an out, even in the book itself. The next line, the elders of the town shall then summon him and talk to him. If he insists, saying, I do not want to take her, right? Oh, yeah, no, I skipped this other line. But if the party does not want to take the brother's widow to wife, his brother's widow shall appear before the elders in the gate and declare, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name in Israel for his brother. He will not perform the duty of the levier. So that's what happens. The elders of the town that summon him and talk to him if he insists, saying, I do not want to take her. So he says it in front of everybody. His brother's widow shall go up in the presence of the elders, pull the sandal off his feet, foot, spit in his face and make this declaration. Thus shall be done to a man who has not built up his brother's house. And he shall go in Israel by the name of the family of the unsandaled one, which is Halutz Hanal. So he did not perform the duty that he was supposed to do, which is keep. This is the law of Chalitza. This is what we call it, Chalitza. So somebody could do that. You have had your shoe drawn off, which again is somewhat symbolic. And you can see there's a whole, this is part of the tractate of Yevamot. Now, of course, this is important because in the story of Ruth, there's a guy that's supposed to be married to Ruth, and they basically don't name him, but he's the guy who does the chalitza. He says, I don't want to marry this woman. And then Boaz steps up and says, I'll marry her. Why? Because he was a relative, but he wasn't as close of a relative as the guy who was supposed to marry her, who we never learned his name. He's called Plonioni, which is this anonymous. He's anonymous. We don't know him. We're from random guy. And he was the one who was supposed to marry Ruth. He doesn't want to deal with it. And so Boaz has this ritual performed right in front of everybody. And now, according to the book of Ruth, doesn't seem to be a big stigma about it. Here, it seems like it's very embarrassing that he did this. In the book of Ruth, the guy walks away. Not my responsibility. I'm not doing it. And Boaz steps up and, of course, ends up having King David as a great grandson as a reward. Correct. Now, they actually were smart, though, in that story of Ruth, because what do? Boaz tells the guy, if you want to marry Ruth, you have to deal with the baggage of marrying Ruth. And he basically says, you're going to have to take care of her mother, right? You're going to have to take care of her mother, which are actually you're going to have to take care of. There's a bunch of stuff that comes with Ruth. Well, again, that's what made him back out. So if people knew that there were other contingencies that were part of this, they would back out. Now, the story of Ruth tells us that this happened. The Bible gives us a way out for the chalitza, that this didn't always happen. People had a way out. So that's what we're going to finish with today. I promise you, come back next week, because if two people fight and one man and the other, the wife of one of them grabs his, you'll read it next week. That's all I can tell you. If you want to read about that, come back next week, because that's in the Bible. That's all I'm going to tell you. It's in the Bible. So that's chapter 11. We'll come back next week. So everybody, we do have services this Friday night. It has nothing to do with this Torah portion, which anyways, we'll see you, if not Friday, we'll see you next week. So thanks, everybody. And especially the people that were joining us out of state. Please take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon, I hope, either online or in person. Take care. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.